She lived in a small, quiet town where the streets were narrow and the houses stood close together. She had a simple life that revolved around work and routine. Each day she woke up early, prepared breakfast for herself, and left for the little shop, where she worked behind the counter. She liked her job because it gave her a purpose and kept her mind occupied, but it did not fill the emptiness she sometimes felt in the evenings. When the house was silent, she often thought about the life she had imagined for herself when she was younger. She dreamed of laughter in the mornings, of a shared home, and conversations that lasted into the night. She wanted someone to share her thoughts and fears, someone who could see beyond her calm exterior and understand her soul. She had tried going out in the town to meet people, but every time she felt awkward and unsure, and slowly she gave up on the idea of meeting someone the ordinary way. One day, while arranging the letters on the counter at the shop, she noticed a small flyer that had been delivered among the daily mail. It was colorful and promised companionship through a mail service, a whale service. A small part of her laughed at the thought because it seemed old-fashioned, but another part felt a spark of curiosity. She picked up the flyer and read through it again, imagining what it might be like to write to someone far away. Someone she would not meet at the market or in a crowded cafe, but someone who could write back and share small pieces of their life. After thinking for several nights, she decided to try it. She sat by her window with a cup of tea and wrote her first letter, carefully choosing her words. She spoke about her daily life, the little joys she found in simple things, the work she loved, and the books she read. She did not speak about love, because at that point she was not sure she believed it could happen in this way. She sent the letter with a small hope that someone out there might read it and smile. Meanwhile, far away in a city that was large and bustling, another person was also feeling lonely. He had a gentle spirit and had spent most of his days quietly working at a small office where he filed papers and answered calls. He liked order and routine, but he felt a constant longing for someone to understand him, someone who would notice the small details about him that others ignored. He too had received the same flyer, but had not taken it seriously at first. He had ignored it until that evening, when he felt a strong desire to try something different and maybe take a small risk. He wrote his letter with care, speaking about his work, his love for music, the way he enjoyed the smell of old books and the feeling of quiet streets at night. He did not expect anyone to respond, but he felt a strange relief in writing down his thoughts and sending them out into the world. Days passed and a letter arrived at her door. It was not the one she expected at first because of a mistake at the mail service. Her letter had been misdirected, and so had his, but the letter that arrived had a handwriting that was kind and steady, with words that made her pause and smile. She read it again and again, noticing how similar some of their thoughts were, how both of them described small joys and ordinary moments with a tenderness that surprised her. She decided to reply carefully, not knowing that the letter she was responding to had also been sent by mistake. Letters began to come more frequently. They spoke of ordinary things that felt extraordinary because they were shared. They wrote about the weather, the food they enjoyed, the books they had read, and the music that touched their hearts. They laughed in writing about small mistakes they had made and confided fears that they would not speak aloud to anyone else. Each letter made the distance feel smaller, and each reply brought a sense of anticipation that was new to both of them. Friends in the town noticed a change in her. She smiled more often. She seemed lighter, and her steps had a spring that was unusual. She did not explain the letters fully because it felt private and magical. She knew that this connection was growing in a way that could not be measured by ordinary standards, and she wanted to savor it slowly. In the city, the man also felt a change. He looked forward to the post every day and sometimes reread the letters to capture the warmth they brought into his life. His colleagues noticed he seemed happier, though. He did not explain why he found himself thinking of someone who was so far away, yet felt closer than anyone he had ever known. Evan. With the excitement and joy, there were moments of doubt. They wondered if it was foolish to feel so deeply for someone they had never met. They worried about the reality of meeting and the possibility that the connection might fade. But these worries were tempered by the honesty in each letter, by the care in every word, and by the sense that they had found someone rare and genuine in a world that often felt cold and distant. She began to imagine what he might look like, what his voice might sound like, and how it would feel to see his eyes light up with a smile. She felt a nervous thrill that had not existed. In her life before, she did not rush, but she allowed herself to hope, allowing the letters to build a bridge between her lonely evenings and the possibility of something more. The man too allowed himself to imagine the life they might share. He pictured conversations over tea, quiet walks in small streets, the comfort of someone who understood without explanation. He felt a longing that was both gentle and powerful, something that had been absent from his life for years. He realized that this correspondence had become more than letters. It had become a small lifeline, a light that he did not want to lose. As weeks turned into months, the bond grew stronger. Letters became a ritual, a thread connecting to lives across miles and circumstances they shared. Dreams, fears, and ordinary moments with a sincerity that made each of them feel seen in a way they had never felt before. The mistake that brought the letters together seemed less like an error and more like fate, carefully crafting a story neither of them had anticipated. One rainy evening, she sat by her window reading a letter that spoke of hope and patience. She felt a warmth that spread through her chest and a quiet excitement that she had never known. She smiled softly to herself, feeling that the connection was real, even if the meeting was still a question mark in the distance far away. The man sat in a small room by a dim lamp, reading a reply that made his heart lift. He felt a sense of belonging that he had longed for, a feeling that someone out there truly understood his quiet world. He traced the handwriting with his fingers and allowed himself to imagine a future that seemed uncertain yet full of possibility. And so their lives continued to intertwine through letters, small tokens of thought and words that carried more meaning than either had expected. A simple mistake had started the journey, and yet it had opened a door to a connection that neither had dared to dream would be possible. They continued to write, each day building a story of hope, anticipation, and the quiet magic of two hearts discovering one another across the miles. Letters continued to arrive, each one bringing a small rush of excitement that neither had expected. They were no longer just words on paper. They were pieces of their days, pieces of their thoughts, and pieces of their hearts. Each letter was read slowly, carefully savored, and sometimes reread to capture the warmth and humor that had begun to fill their lives. She found herself looking forward to the post more than anything else. The sound of the mail sliding through the slot made her heart beat a little faster. She wondered about the world he lived in, the streets he walked, the songs he listened to, the way he might pause to notice small details just like she did. She felt a connection that was gentle yet strong, something that made her mornings brighter and her nights quieter in a good way. He too waited for each letter with a quiet impatience that grew. With every passing day, the city around him was busy, noisy, and often harsh, but the letters were a safe place, a calm space where he could breathe and be himself without judgment. He traced the handwriting on the paper, imagining the careful thought behind every word and the patience that must have gone into writing each reply. They shared stories that were ordinary, yet somehow extraordinary, because they were shared. They wrote about the mornings when sunlight spilled across the floor, when a cup of tea tasted especially warm, when the first notes of a favorite song filled the room. They wrote about small mistakes at work, funny encounters with strangers, and memories from childhood that still made them smile. They laughed in writing at the little absurdities of life and comforted each other. When a day had been hard at times, she found herself rereading a letter before she went to bed, letting the words wrap around her like a blanket. She imagined him reading her letters in his quiet room, imagining her expressions, imagining the way her hands might move as she wrote. She felt a closeness that was strange and beautiful at the same time. It was as if the distance made everything feel more real, because they were choosing to reach out to one another despite the miles. He sometimes read her letters while sitting by the window, looking at the city lights far below. He imagined her in her little town, thinking of him at the same moment, imagining his voice and his thoughts. He smiled at the way she described the small wonders of her life and at the honesty in the way she spoke about her fears and hopes. He felt a sense of understanding that was rare, something that made him believe in the possibility of something meaningful beyond his usual routine. Friends began to notice changes in both of them. Though neither spoke much about the letters, she was lighter in her movements, More patient and happier in small ways, people asked if something had happened, and she would only smile vaguely, keeping the magic of the letters private. He, too, carried a quiet energy with him, a calm happiness that people around him noticed, but did not question. He liked it that way. It felt personal, it felt theirs. Despite the growing closeness, there were moments of doubt. They wondered if it was foolish to feel so much for someone they had never met in person. They worried about appearances, about reality, about what might happen if the connection faded once the excitement of letters was replaced by the routine of life. They wrote about these doubts at times honestly and openly, finding comfort in the fact that the other understood the fears without judging them. One afternoon, she wrote about a dream she had had the night before. She described walking through a forest filled with sunlight and shadows, feeling the warmth on her face and the soft ground under her feet. She spoke about the feeling of being both free and safe at the same time, and how she wished someone could share that feeling with her. He read the letter slowly, imagining the forest, imagining her there, imagining the light playing across her face. He replied with a story of a walk he had taken in a small park, describing the quiet rustle of leaves, the smell of wet earth, and the calm it had brought him. He told her how he wished she could have been there to see it, and she felt a thrill of closeness that went beyond words. They began to share small secrets, little things they had never told anyone else. She wrote about the books she had hidden on the top shelf because she felt silly about loving them. She spoke about moments of loneliness that still crept in despite the letters. She described dreams she was embarrassed to admit, yet wanted someone to understand. He shared memories of childhood that had shaped him quietly, moments of shame and pride, little victories and small regrets. They found that the honesty in the letters made them feel brave enough to reveal their true selves. There were moments of playfulness too. They teased each other gently in writing, sending riddles, jokes, and small challenges to solve. They created small games that could only exist between them, a secret world where laughter and affection were expressed through ink and paper. They found that humor became a bridge for times when the words of the heart were too heavy to write, and it brought a lightness to their days. As winter approached, the letters took on a different tone. They wrote about the first snow, the chill in the morning air, and the warmth of tea and blankets. They imagined sitting together by a fire, talking quietly about nothing and everything. They shared wishes about holidays and celebrations, dreams of how they might spend special days together. Someday they began to imagine a future that was not just about letters, but about a life they could build together. Even the warmth of their growing bond, there were practical worries. They wondered about how they would meet for the first time. The right place, the right time, the right moment. They spoke about fears of disappointment, about whether reality could match the vividness of their imaginations. They wrote to reassure each other that the bond they had built was strong enough to face uncertainty, and that the connection was worth the risk. Through all this, the mistake that had brought their letters together seemed less like an accident and more like a strange gift. The wrong delivery had become the start of something neither had anticipated, yet both cherished deeply. They began to understand that love did not always follow a straight path. Sometimes it arrived through small openings. Sometimes it grew slowly through patience and care, and sometimes it arrived when they least expected it. One evening, she wrote about a simple moment in her day when she had paused by the window, watching the sun dip below the hills. She described the feeling of hope and anticipation that lingered even in small things. She felt that something important was growing in her heart, a gentle certainty that the connection with him was more than words, a real feeling that made life richer. He read the letter with a quiet smile, feeling the same certainty swelling inside him that this bond was becoming an essential part of who he was. They began to notice patterns in each other's writing, the way certain phrases would appear, the small details that revealed moods, the subtle hints of affection hidden between sentences. They felt seen in ways they had not been seen before. They realized that over time the letters had created a space where they could be fully themselves without fear, and that this space was becoming indispensable. The anticipation of receiving a letter became a rhythm to their lives. She would plan her day around the moment she expected the mail. He would organize his mornings so that he could read her letters with a cup of tea. Before starting work, it was not just communication, it was a lifeline, a gentle thread connecting to worlds separated by miles yet joined in a shared understanding. Even In moments of silence when letters were delayed, they felt a presence of each other. The memory of the last letter, the imagined smile at the words they had written carried them through the days. It was a quiet companionship, a reassurance that someone else was thinking of them in the same gentle way. They were thinking of the other and so the letters continued their journey across towns and cities, carrying more than words, carrying hope, joy, longing, and a quiet love that neither had expected. They built a world together in which small moments were magnified by shared attention, where ordinary life became extraordinary through connection, and where simple mistake had begun to grow into a bond that was real, tangible, and deeply felt. The day finally arrived when they decided to meet in person. Both of them had imagined the moment countless times through letters, and each imagined it differently. But they shared a quiet hope that the feeling would be real, and not just a shadow of their imagination. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel comfortable and confident. She walked slowly to the small cafe they had agreed upon, her heart beating faster with each step. He arrived early, pacing the streets nearby, checking his watch over and over. He wondered if she would recognize him if she was nervous, or if he would recognize her if she looked different than he imagined. They had exchanged descriptions, but the mind often changes small details, making the real moment feel both strange and familiar. He took a deep breath and tried to calm the excitement and fear that swirled inside him when she entered the cafe. She felt a strange mixture of anxiety and curiosity. She scanned the room, and for a moment her heart skipped a beat. He was there, looking around as if searching for her too. When their eyes met, a small smile appeared on both faces. They walked toward each other slowly, unsure how to begin, unsure how to bridge the distance that had been physical but never emotional. They greeted each other quietly, sitting down across from each other, the table between them seeming both large and small at the same time. She noticed the warmth in his eyes, the slight hesitation in his smile, and the kindness in his expression that had been present in his letters. He noticed her calm presence, the gentle way she moved, and the thoughtful look in her eyes that mirrored the words he had grown to love. The first minutes were awkward, as they spoke about simple things, the weather, the cafe, the journey to meet each other, but slowly the conversation began to flow more naturally. They laughed at small mishaps along the way, the bus that had been late, the coat that had slipped from her shoulder, the slight mispronunciation of a word. They felt a comfort in the quiet moments, to the pauses between words that did not feel empty because they were together. Spoke about the letters, the way they had written and read them, the anticipation, the joy, the small anxieties that had come with each envelope. They realized that the letters had prepared them for this moment, that every word had been a step toward being with each other. They smiled at the thought that a mistake at a mail service had led to something so meaningful. She noticed small things about him that she had only imagined before: the tilt of his head when he listened, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the little laugh that came when he was amused. He noticed details about her too, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, the quiet strength in her posture, the subtle movements that spoke of thoughtfulness and courage. They walked outside after leaving the cafe. They explored the streets, slowly noticing the small shops, the trees, the movement of people around them. They shared stories of their childhoods, memories of family and friends, little incidents that had shaped who they were. They spoke of hopes and dreams, admitting things that had never been said to anyone else. It was as if the letters had created a safe space where honesty was easy and vulnerability was welcome. They discovered differences from what they had imagined. She had thought he might be taller, and he had thought she might speak more quickly, but the differences were not obstacles, or part of the richness of meeting in real life. They laughed at the contrast, realizing that the letters had captured the essence, but not the details, and that was what made it real and exciting. They found themselves talking about fears, to the things that kept them awake, the anxieties about life, about work, about being alone. They listened without judgment, offering quiet reassurance with words and gestures. They realized that these conversations had been happening in writing for months, but now they could see the emotions reflected in each other's eyes, making the bond deeper and stronger. A small park, they sat on a bench watching children play, the sunlight filtering through the branches. Above them, she spoke about how the letters had changed her days, how she had felt lighter and more hopeful. He spoke about the comfort and joy the letters had brought him, how they had made him see the world differently together. They acknowledged the power of something so small, yet so profound. The afternoon passed into evening, and they continued walking side by side, sharing silences as well as words. They found comfort in the mundane, noticing the rhythm of their steps, the sound of the wind, and the occasional laughter of people nearby. Each moment felt significant, because it was shared, because it was real, and because it had grown from something they had nurtured carefully over time. They found a small, quiet spot where they could sit and talk without interruption. They discussed the future, wondering when they might meet again, how they might continue the connection they had built. They spoke honestly about fears of disappointment, the worry that life might get in the way, the uncertainty that always comes with choices and plans. They reassured each other with words that were soft, yet certain words that promised care and patience. As night fell, they walked back slowly, savoring the closeness of being together. They held hands lightly, at first unsure, then more confidently, feeling the simple power of touch that had been absent in their correspondence, but was now a natural part of their presence. They realized that the connection they had built through letters had prepared them for this intimacy, for this shared space where trust and affection could grow in. They finally parted that evening. They felt a sense of longing, already knowing that the memory of the day would stay with them. They promised to continue writing to each other, as well as planning their next meetings. They understood that the letters were still important, the written word, still a part of their bond, but now it was complemented by the reality of shared moments, by the presence of each other in the same space. In the days following the meeting, they both reflected on the experience, noticing subtle changes within themselves. She felt a new confidence, a reassurance that genuine connection was possible, and that love could arrive. In unexpected ways, he felt a lightness he had not known in years, a sense that his life had expanded beyond routine and solitude. They continued writing each day, but now the letters carried new depth, new memories, and a tangible excitement about the future. They shared small anecdotes about the meeting, remembering conversations and gestures, laughing at little awkward moments, and savoring moments of comfort and affection. They wrote about how the meeting had exceeded expectations in some ways and differed in others, but that every detail was now a part of their shared story. They noticed how the presence of each other made ordinary moments extraordinary, just as the letters had done before. Even with the joy of meeting, there were still moments of doubt, the uncertainty about the next steps, the fear of life intervening, the worry that reality might not always match the ideal of imagination. They wrote openly about these fears, admitting vulnerability and finding reassurance in the understanding of the other. They realized that the bond they had created was resilient because it was based on honesty, patience, and shared experience. Through it all, they continued to nurture their connection through letters, small visits, and shared moments. They discovered that love was not only in grand gestures, but in the small choices, in the attentiveness, and the willingness to understand and support each other. They learned that patience and care could turn uncertainty into a foundation that was steady and reliable. The first meeting became a cherished memory, a story they would often revisit in letters, recalling the nervous anticipation, the first glance, the quiet laughter, and the comfort of shared presence. They realized that it was not just a moment in time, but a turning point that deepened their connection and gave them both a new sense of hope and joy. They understood that mistakes sometimes led to the most meaningful experiences, that the unexpected could become the most treasured, and that love could grow slowly yet powerfully through patience, communication, and shared humanity. They continued to write and plan future meetings, each step reinforcing the sense that something rare and valuable was unfolding between them, and so their lives continued intertwined in letters and meetings. Small moments in shared laughter, learning to trust and care, and discovering that the bond that had begun through a mistake had grown into something real, tangible, and enduring. The days after their first meeting were filled with excitement and reflection. Each letter now carried more than just words. It carried memories of the day they had spent together and the emotions that had grown from seeing each other in person. She noticed that her heart felt lighter and her thoughts wandered to him, often in ways that were new and thrilling. He found that his mind replayed the conversations, the laughter, and the quiet moments they had shared, and he smiled quietly at the memory. They planned their next meeting carefully, choosing a weekend when they could spend time together without rushing. Both felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, wondering if the connection would remain as strong when the novelty of meeting faded. They wrote to each other openly about these feelings, sharing hopes and fears and finding comfort in the understanding that had been built over months of letters' distance. Continued to challenge them in small ways. The man sometimes faced busy workdays that made it difficult to write quickly, and she had responsibilities that required her attention at the shop and home. Despite this, they made an effort to maintain the rhythm of correspondence. They understood that communication was the lifeline of their bond, and that small delays or missed letters did not diminish the trust they had cultivated through the letters. They discovered more about each other. The woman wrote about her love for quiet walks in the evening, and how she sometimes watched the stars, imagining someone else doing the same. He shared his habit of listening to music while walking home from work, and how certain songs reminded him of different moments in life. They found joy in the discovery of similarities and differences, and in the shared delight of noticing small details about the other. They also began to share challenges and struggles that they had not revealed before. She wrote about the loneliness that still crept in despite the letters and meetings, and how it sometimes made her doubt the possibility of lasting connection. He shared his worries about work pressures, the sense of isolation he sometimes felt in the city, and his fear of losing the closeness they had built. These admissions deepened their trust and reinforced the idea that honesty was the foundation of their growing bond. Friends and family noticed changes in them both. She seemed more confident and lively, her laughter easier and more frequent. He carried a calm energy that drew people toward him without effort. They did not explain the full story to anyone, keeping the connection private and sacred. The magic of letters and meetings was something they wished to nurture without interference. The anticipation of seeing each other became a rhythm in their lives. Each visit was carefully imagined and talked about through letters they planned. Small outings, simple walks in parks, visits to quiet cafes, and moments spent sitting together reading or listening to music. They found that ordinary activities became extraordinary when shared, and that each meeting strengthened the bond they had built. Despite the growing closeness, there were moments of tension and worry. They feared that distance might create misunderstandings, or that life's responsibilities might interfere with their time together. They wrote to reassure each other, reminding themselves that patience and communication were their strongest tools. They discovered that facing challenges together in writing prepared them to handle difficulties in person as well. One evening, she wrote about a moment when she had paused by the river, watching the reflection of lights on the water. She described a feeling of peace and hope, and how she wished he could have been there to see it with her. He read the letter, imagining the scene vividly, feeling as though he were beside her. He replied with his own memory of a quiet evening in the city, sharing the same sense of calm and presence. They realized that even when apart, they could share experiences and emotions in ways that made the distance feel smaller. They began to plan for longer visits, gradually spending entire weekends together, exploring small towns and quiet streets. She enjoyed the way he noticed little things she had overlooked, the way he remembered small details about stories she had told, and the gentle patience he showed when she needed time to feel comfortable. He appreciated the way she listened to him without judgment, the way she encouraged him to share his thoughts, and the warmth she carried in her presence. Through these visits, they discovered how small gestures could carry great meaning. Holding hands while walking the quiet streets, sharing a cup of tea, sitting in comfortable silence, laughing at small mishaps, all of these moments became part of a tapestry that was uniquely theirs. They realized that love was not always in grand expressions, but in attentiveness, consistency, and the willingness to understand and support each other. Also faced challenges that tested their patience. The man sometimes faced unexpected work pressures that delayed letters or visits, and she encountered responsibilities at the shop that made it hard to plan meetings. They discovered that these obstacles were not insurmountable when approached with honesty and care. They wrote about frustrations, openly sharing feelings without blame and finding solutions. Together, as winter gave way to spring, the letters took on new colors. They spoke about the beauty of nature, returning the smell of blossoms, the warmth of sunlight, and the joy of shared walks in the park. They wrote about dreams for the future and possibilities for longer time together. They imagined adventures and small trips, and discussed ways to integrate their lives more closely. While respecting their individual worlds during these months, they also reflected on the beginnings of their bond, the strange twist of fate that had brought them together through a mistake at the mail service. They laughed quietly at the thought of what might have happened if the letters had gone to the intended recipients. They felt gratitude for the error that had introduced them to each other, and for the courage they had both shown in writing honestly and openly. They began to dream together about a life that might be shared more fully. The woman imagined mornings spent with conversation and tea and quiet walks. He imagined evenings of shared music, reading together, and planning small adventures. They discussed what it would mean to support each other through challenges, to celebrate achievements, and to nurture the bond that had grown over months of letters and visits. Sivan. As they imagined the future, they stayed grounded in the present, savoring each meeting, each letter, each shared smile and laugh. They understood that love was a process, a careful cultivation of trust, attention, and presence. They discovered that small moments could be as meaningful as milestones, and that consistency and patience were as powerful as passion and excitement. The letters continued to be a vital part of their connection. Each envelope carried not just words, but memories of meetings, anticipation for future visits, and reflections on the growth they were experiencing together. They found that reading a letter could evoke the warmth of a shared smile, the sound of laughter, and the feeling of presence, even when they were miles apart. Through all this, they learned to communicate with care, to listen with attention, to express thoughts and feelings honestly, and to approach each challenge with patience and understanding. They discovered that the bond they had built was resilient, not because it was free from obstacles, but because it had been nurtured through honesty, trust, and shared experience. They faced moments of doubt as well, the worry that life might interfere, the fear that one of them might grow impatient, or that distance might weaken the connection. Yet they found that writing openly about these concerns reassured them. Each letter became a promise, a reminder of commitment, and a tool for navigating uncertainty. They realized that love was strengthened, not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to face it together through this time. They also explored the little details that made their relationship unique. They created small rituals in writing that only they understood, codes, jokes, and references that reinforced their closeness. They noticed subtle patterns in each other's expression of thoughts and feelings, and found comfort in the predictability and reliability of these signals. They began to imagine a more permanent life together, exploring possibilities for living closer, planning activities, and discussing dreams that were more concrete. She spoke about wanting a shared home filled with small comforts and attention to detail. He imagined contributing in his own way, creating a space of care and thoughtfulness. They realized that their bond had grown from words to shared experiences, and that the next step was to integrate their lives more fully. As months passed, the connection deepened. They felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that each had found someone who truly understood and valued them. They celebrated small victories, the completion of projects, the joy of shared laughter, and the comfort of mutual support. They learned to navigate differences with patience, to celebrate similarities with delight, and to embrace the unpredictability of life together. And so they continued to write and meet, to explore and reflect, to support and share. Each day brought new opportunities for connection and understanding. They realized that love was not simply a feeling, but a series of choices, moments of attention, care, and presence that created a foundation for something lasting and meaningful. A bond that had begun with a mistake in the mail service had now grown into a resilient connection, a shared story, and a mutual commitment. They understood that life was full of surprises, and that sometimes the unexpected could lead to the most profound and cherished experiences. They continued to nurture their relationship with intention, patience, and joy, discovering the beauty of love that grows steadily and deeply through understanding, trust, and care. The months passed, and the bond they had built grew stronger. Each letter carried memories of meetings, laughter, shared dreams, and reflections on life. They continued to meet whenever they could, planning small trips and quiet weekends. Together, their connection was no longer just words on paper. It was a living experience, something that influenced the way they thought, acted, and felt in their daily lives. They began to imagine a future that included each other more fully, she spoke. About small routines, she hoped they could share mornings, spent preparing breakfast, together quiet walks in the evening, and simple conversations that lasted long into the night. Spoke about creating a space where they could both feel at home. Contributing in ways that reflected their personalities and strengths, they discussed practical steps the distance, the responsibilities, the plans for shared life, and the compromises that would be necessary. Despite the growing closeness, there were challenges they faced, worries about timing the demands of work, the responsibilities of family, and the uncertainty that naturally comes with planning life together. They wrote openly about these concerns, sharing feelings without fear of judgment. They discovered that honesty in expressing doubt made their bond even stronger, and that working through uncertainty together brought a deeper sense of trust. One evening, she wrote about a quiet moment sitting by the river, remembering the first meeting, the nervousness, the anticipation, and the joy of finally being together. She reflected on the journey from letters to meetings to shared experiences and felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected beginning. She realized that love had grown slowly through care, attention, and understanding, and that the mistake at the mail service had been a gift guiding them to something meaningful. He read her letter, imagining the river, imagining her thoughts and feelings. He reflected on how far they had come from the first hesitant letters to the confident conversations and shared moments they now enjoyed. He wrote back about his own reflections, the changes he had felt in himself, the joy of being understood and appreciated, and the anticipation of building a life together. He shared the hope that they would continue to nurture their bond with care, patience, and presence. Began to plan for longer visits and more shared experiences. They explored small towns together, walked through quiet streets, discovered new cafes and parks, and created memories that would last a lifetime. Each shared experience became part of the story. They were writing together a story of connection, patience, trust, and love. They learned that everyday moments could carry great significance when shared with someone who truly cared and understood. Through these months, they discovered the strength of small gestures. The holding of hands during quiet walks, the sharing of meals, the preparation of tea, the laughter at small mishaps, and the comfort of being together without the need for words, all became symbols of the bond they shared. They realized that love was not only about grand declarations, but about attention, presence, and thoughtful action. In ordinary moments, they continued to write letters even when they met frequently. The letters became a way to reflect, to express feelings that were sometimes difficult to say in person, and to share thoughts about the future. They found that writing allowed them to be deliberate with their words, to explore emotions carefully, and to connect on a deeper level. The rhythm of letters and meetings became a balanced harmony in their lives, a way to nurture love across distance and time. Challenges still appeared. They faced delays in letters, unexpected responsibilities, changes in plans, and the natural uncertainties of life. Each time they addressed these challenges openly, discussing feelings, expressing concerns, and finding solutions together, they discovered that the bond they had built was resilient because it was based on communication, honesty, and a willingness to understand and support each other. The anticipation of moving toward a more permanent life together grew. They imagined shared homes filled with small comforts, books, music, and quiet corners for conversation. They spoke about routines and habits, about supporting each other through work stress and personal goals, about celebrating small victories and comforting each other during setbacks. They found joy in planning together, imagining the details, and appreciating the possibilities. The man sometimes reflected on the journey with quiet amazement, how a mistake in a mail service had led to letters that had grown into meetings that had grown into a life shared across miles and hearts. He appreciated the patience, the thoughtfulness, the laughter, and the honesty that had created the foundation for something lasting. He realized that the love they were building was the result of careful attention and mutual care. She too reflected on the journey, the letters that had been written, the moments of joy, the moments of doubt, the shared experiences, the patience and understanding. They had nurtured something rare and precious. She felt gratitude for the unexpected circumstances that had led to their meeting, and pride in the way they had cultivated trust, care, and affection over time. She understood that love could grow slowly, steadily, and deeply when it was based on honesty and shared humanity. Began to imagine life beyond letters and visits, the possibilities of shared routines, the comfort of presence, the joy of companionship, and the strength that comes from mutual support. They spoke openly about hopes, dreams, fears, and plans, and discovered that the act of imagining together strengthened the bond even more. They realized that the future was not fixed, it was something they could shape together with care and attention as. They prepared for a longer visit. They focused on creating moments that would be memorable, yet ordinary, simple activities that carried meaning. Because they were shared, they cooked together, walked through gardens, explored quiet streets, visited small shops, and sat together watching the world move around them. They discovered that the small, ordinary moments could carry as much significance as special events when experienced with love, attention, and presence. They also reflected on the transformation in themselves and each other. The woman felt a sense of confidence, joy, and security that had been absent before. The man felt a calm strength and a fulfillment that he had longed for. They both realized that the bond they had built had created growth in themselves, had given them the courage to trust and love, and connection. They continued to write letters reflecting on these changes, expressing appreciation for the other, for the patience, care, thoughtfulness, and love they had shared. They celebrated the progress they had made in building trust and understanding, and used letters as a way to deepen the connection, even when apart. The rhythm of writing and meeting became a part of their life, a balance that brought both excitement and comfort. They faced the natural uncertainties of life, together supporting each other through challenges, the demands of work, the responsibilities of family, and the unpredictability of daily life. Each time they encountered obstacles, they wrote openly, discussed feelings, and found solutions together. They discovered that resilience in love comes from patience, attention, communication, and the willingness to navigate difficulties as a team. Through all of this, they found joy in small rituals, the sharing of jokes, the creation of codes and references. Only they understood the little attentions, the ways of noticing moods and emotions and responding with care. They realized that these small gestures carried as much weight as larger expressions of affection and were part of the deep bond they had cultivated. As their time together grew longer, they began to integrate more fully into each other's lives, planning for a shared space, a shared future, and a shared life. They imagined routines, morning walks, shared meals, evenings, reading together, quiet conversation, and shared laughter. They spoke about dreams for travel, new experiences, hobbies, and shared projects. They discovered that planning together strengthened the bond and gave them confidence in the durability of their love. They continued to write, reflecting on shared experiences, the journey from letters to meetings to shared moments. In the joy of imagining a future together, they acknowledged the importance of patience, communication, honesty, and attention in nurturing love. They understood that love was built slowly through consistency, care, and shared presence, and that this foundation was strong and lasting. The months turned into a season of togetherness as they continued to meet, write, and imagine. They reflected on how the bond had grown from a small mistake in the mail service to a profound connection that had changed their lives. They celebrated the small victories, the ordinary moments, and the quiet successes of building trust, care, and affection. They discovered that love was not just a feeling, but an ongoing act of attention, presence, and shared humanity. And so the story that had begun with letters slowly grew into a life shared, a connection, nurtured, a bond, strengthened. By patience, honesty, and care, they realized that the unexpected could lead to the most meaningful experiences, that love could grow deeply and steadily, and that the simple act of choosing to reach out to another human being could create a story of hope, joy, and connection that would endure for a lifetime.